What's going on, everybody? I'm Jiffy Nano, and today we're going to go over some new Godfall information, the UI, and an explanation of the loot progression and, most importantly, endgame. So get yourself a drink and a snack, prepare to see the same gameplay and trailers repeat in the background because it's going to be a good one. So we'll start off with what everyone wants to know about endgame, loot, and progression. Personally, endgame is a huge deal for me, and I think it's extremely important for a lasting game, and from the interviews and rumblings, we have a lot to choose from. The first thing we know about is hunt missions. These are secondary missions that set you off in an area so you can learn about, track down, and eventually kill a mini-boss. From the interviews, they said that these bosses are going to be different from the ones in the main story, and there's supposed to be quite a few of these missions. We also have side quests, and this somewhat goes without saying, as most games like this have side quests, but they do consider these part of the endgame. When talking about the side quests, they said that they're all combat based and there won't be any fetch quest style side missions. I personally think this is really good, as filler type side missions like fetch quests are usually the worst part of games like this, and for me at least, end up being ignored until I absolutely have to finish them. Now for the activity I am most excited for, the Tower of Trials. This was all broken down in a GameBite article which I'll have linked in the description. The technical producer at Counterplay Games, Dick Hayne, described the Tower of Trials as a roguelike challenge mode that can be played in solo or co-op. You enter the tower through the monolith and you complete combat trials to progress. There are elevator trials and room trials. Elevator trials are waves of enemies in the elevator room that let you progress higher into the tower and grant you keys, which is the tower exclusive currency that can be used to unlock rewards at the end of room trials. After finishing an elevator trial, you get to choose a room with the rewards you would receive indicated by a symbol on the door. Entering one of these rooms starts a room trial, and when you finish that, you can collect your rewards and go back to the elevator to continue up the tower. The higher you go, the harder it gets, and the more keys you receive, which lets you unlock more and higher tier rewards. This is so cool. This is the type of endgame mode that I have been wanting from other loot games like Borderlands and Destiny for years, and I am super excited to play this in Godfall. Not only does it provide a replayable, rewarding challenge for loot, but it can also be used as a challenge for your builds and skill as a player. Speed runs to certain levels, climbing as high as possible before you just get dunked on. This is the type of mode that gives us hardcore players so much more to do than just min-maxing a build to the nth degree. And personally, I cannot wait to climb this tower to the point where enemies are one-shotting me. Okay, so Geek Out mode over. There are also two other activities that were mentioned but never elaborated on, these being Dreamstones and custom game modes. But aside from the names and the fact that they were mentioned as endgame activities, we know nothing else about them. That being said, it's nice to see that there's a lot of endgame options, and I hope that they continue to add things to the endgame to help keep the experience fresh long after the release window. So next up we have loot progression. The technical producer described the loot like a painting, where your Valor plate is the canvas and each kind of loot is layers of paint, layer 1 being weapons. There are 120 weapons across 5 different archetypes, with every weapon having its own name and lore, and from the older interviews with the devs we know that all the gear in the game can be upgraded to be used at your level through crafting. So all the weapons should be usable at endgame. Also, all of the weapons and trinkets have their own unique primary effects and rerollable secondary effects. Speaking of trinkets, they are layer 2. There are 3 types of trinkets: rings, amulets, and charms. You can equip 2 rings, 1 amulet, and 1 charm. And I would venture to guess that, like weapons, there is a relatively small amount of these, and with rings, I am curious to see if you can equip 2 of the same to double dip in their exclusive primary ability, but as of now, all we know that their effects will correlate with breaching, soul shatters, and weak points, which we'll get into later. Layer 3 is the Life Stone, which from how it was described functions very similarly to the Life Flask from Path of Exile or Diablo, where you have limited charges that can be used to heal yourself and they recharge through combat. This also has exclusive effects tied to them, so these should be pretty interesting to experiment with. Layer 4 is the Battle Banner. In the gameplay that we have seen, we only see this in action for a few seconds. Your character slams down a banner that has an area around it that can either buff you or your teammates or debuff enemies. This was said to be the strongest co-op tool, but should still pack a punch during solo as well. And the final and probably most impactful layer is the Augment Constellation. This functions as essentially a blank skill tree with different colored nodes, each color representing a different stat. red being might, which is most likely something like strength, green being vitality, which is life and HP, and blue being spirit, which I would probably describe as like your mana. All of the augments in this game have corresponding colors and can only be slotted into matching colored nodes or white nodes that can be used for any color augment, each Valor Plate having its own set of nodes with different amounts of each color. Along with color, each augment also has an energy cost that is drained from your constellation's energy limit. The stronger the augment, the higher the cost, making slotting augments a balancing act of picking and choosing what's best for your current build. This system reminds me a lot of a mix between Diablo's gem system and Warframe's mod system, and should keep things interesting, especially if they add more augments later in the game's life. Okay, so that's it for the super interesting stuff, so let's move on to some of the UI news and some of the combat systems that were mentioned in a couple other interviews. Just last week, some creators in Japan were able to get hands-on with the PlayStation 5, and from that we got to see some new gameplay of Godfall in action, including menus and the on-screen HUD. I'll show some screenshots of the UI for you here, and we can see that it's pretty clean and minimal, which I personally like. Sometimes HUDs can be pretty cluttered, and your screen is just covered in stuff and can be distracting during combat itself. You can see at the bottom you have a health bar, an Archon bar, which is like your super bar, the charges of your life stone, the icon for your banner, and the icon for your shield. From the gameplay, we see that shield's abilities work on a cooldown, so you can't spam shield throws, and at the point of the game you can see right now the banner is still locked, and a status notification on the side above the health bar after a player walks through some fire. Enemy HP, name, level, and breach bar are all displayed just above the enemy and on the top of the screen for bosses. Personally, I like that they went for a more minimalistic approach for the UI. I don't like it when a bunch of stuff is flashing at me during combat. It can be distracting, and it lets you take in more of this absolutely gorgeous world that they've constructed without too many things just being in your way. Now, that's about it for UI, but we also have some information on the combat systems when Arex Gaming had an interview with Dick Hayne. I'll have the whole interview linked in the description, but I'll break down the important beats here. During this interview, they talked about weak points, breach and takedowns, soul shatter, and polarity attacks. So weak points are actual points on the enemies that the player can see during breaks in the enemy attack patterns. When these weak points happen, the player has to use their in-game reticle to aim at the point itself and attack during the window to exploit the weak point. If exploited, these weak points can cause bonus damage, crowd control, and even trigger abilities on your gear. Personally, I really like this as it kind of makes you slow down and forces you to be precise and hit these weak points, giving a sense of mastery and skill growth rather than just hack and slash button mashing. Breaching enemies works a lot like a stagger mechanic in other games, where as you attack an enemy you fill their breach bar, and when full they go into a staggering animation, allowing the player to perform a takedown on them. A takedown is usually a tackle or an attack of some kind that will often kill the enemy outright, and just like weak points, breaches and takedowns can be used to trigger abilities on equipped gear. So while attacking an enemy fills their breach bar, you're also filling up their soul shatter bar. Soul Shatter was described as more or less a finisher bar that fills as you attack, the enemy HP bar starting to fill up white, and when the bar is completely white you can initiate a Soul Shatter with a heavy attack, causing the enemy to explode. And as with the other two, this can also trigger abilities on your gear as well. The last mechanic they discussed were polarity attacks, which are based around switching weapons. In Godfall, you can choose two different weapon types to bring into a mission, and while using one, the other is building up a charge. Once charged, you can swap to your stowed weapon, causing a polarity AoE shockwave and buffing the weapon for 30 seconds. This seems really interesting and is definitely something that could be built around to keep cycling that buff for constant uptime, but I'm sure that's something that would be very much endgame and require a lot of min-maxing of all your stats. They also go on to talk about the shield and some of its functions, ranging from normal blocking and parrying all the way to an AoE and a dash attack depending on what skills you end up choosing, so the shield looks like it's going to play a fairly pivotal role in combat rather than just blocks and parries. I have to say I am very excited for this, and I cannot wait to get my hands on this game and experiment with its systems. Some of my favorite things to do in these kinds of games is to push systems like these to their limits and essentially try to break them in my favor, and this seems to be the perfect playground for this kind of thing. So what do you guys think of all the information we have now? Are you as excited for the Tower Trials as I am, and which of the combat mechanics are you interested in most? Personally, I want to cause some serious mayhem with Soul Shatter, so let me know in the comments, and if you found this video informative, a like rating is always appreciated. Consider subscribing so you can see my future uploads, and check out my Twitch channel, where I play all things looter and shooter on Monday and Wednesday afternoon, Friday and Saturdays in the mornings. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.